The dust had long settled in the abandoned Grand Imperial Hotel when Lucia Vance pushed open the warped wooden door for what she told herself would be the last time. Her arms already aching from the basket of half-rotted linens she had been salvaging from the upper floors. The year was 1878, and Republic, Kansas had become little more than a ghost town after the railroad decided to bypass it 3 years prior, leaving behind empty storefronts and broken dreams scattered like tumbleweeds across the prairie. Lucia had stayed because she had nowhere else to go, living off what little she could scavenge and sell to the rare travelers who still passed through on their way to more prosperous settlements further west. The hotel had once been the pride of Republic, a 3-story monument to ambition with imported wallpaper and crystal chandeliers that now hung crooked and dust-covered in the abandoned lobby. Lucia had made it her personal mission to preserve what remained, folding and sorting linens that might still fetch a few coins, polishing silverware that had somehow escaped looters, organizing the chaos as if the guests might return any day. It was foolish, she knew, but it gave her days structure and purpose when both had become scarce commodities in her life. She was 22 years old and alone in a way that went deeper than simple solitude. Her parents had died of fever the winter after the railroad announcement, and her younger brother had headed east to find work in the factories of Chicago, promising to send for her once he got established. That had been 18 months ago, and his letters had stopped coming after the third one. Lucia told herself he was simply busy, that the mail was unreliable, that any day now she would receive word and a train ticket tucked inside an envelope. Until then, she made do with what Republic offered, which was increasingly nothing at all. The November wind rattled the loose window panes as Lucia climbed the grand staircase to the second floor, where the linen closets still held their forgotten treasures. She had already sorted through most of the usable items, but today she was determined to tackle the back corner of the largest closet, where water damage from a leaking roof had likely ruined everything. Still, she had to look. Waste was a luxury she could not afford. She was elbow-deep in damp tablecloths when she heard the sound of a horse outside. Lucia froze, listening. Travelers were rare enough that each one represented either opportunity or danger, and a woman alone had to be cautious about which was which. She set down the linens carefully and moved to the window, staying back from the glass as she peered down at the street below. A single rider sat astride a bay gelding, his broad-brimmed hat shadowing his face as he surveyed the abandoned buildings with what appeared to be a mixture of curiosity and melancholy. He wore working clothes rather than the fancy suit of a drummer or the rough leather of a drifter, his shirt faded blue beneath a worn leather vest, his boots scuffed but well-maintained. The horse was well-fed and groomed, suggesting its owner was neither desperate nor careless. After a long moment, the man dismounted and tied his horse to the hitching post outside the hotel with the ease of someone accustomed to such movements. Lucia's heart hammered as she heard his boots on the porch below, the sound of the front door creaking open. She should hide, she thought wildly, or call out, or do something other than stand frozen like a startled deer. But before she could decide, his voice drifted up the stairwell, deep and surprisingly gentle. "Hello, anyone here? I saw smoke from your fire this morning and figured someone might still be living in town." She swallowed hard and moved to the top of the stairs, looking down at the man who now stood in the dusty lobby, his hat in his hands. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair that needed cutting and a face that was more interesting than handsome, all strong lines and weathered by sun and wind. His eyes, when they found her on the landing above, were a startling shade of blue-gray like storm clouds over the prairie. "The hotel is closed," Lucia said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Has been for near 3 years now." "I can see that," he replied, glancing around at the obvious decay. "I am Ethan Findley. I own a ranch about 8 miles south of here. I was riding through and thought I might find supplies, but it looks like most folks have moved on." "Most folks have," Lucia agreed, slowly descending the stairs, keeping one hand on the banister. "I am Lucia Vance. My family used to run the general store before it closed." Ethan's expression softened with understanding. "You have been here alone all this time." "I manage well enough," she said, lifting her chin slightly. Pride was about all she had left, and she would not surrender it easily. "I have been salvaging what I can from the empty buildings. There are still things of value if you know where to look." He studied her for a moment, and Lucia became acutely aware of how she must appear in her faded calico dress, her dark hair escaping from its hasty braid, her hands reddened from work and cold. She was not beautiful in the way the town belle Marian Tess had been beautiful, all golden curls and dimpled smiles. Lucia was too thin, too sharp-featured, too serious. But Ethan Findley's gaze held no judgment, only a kind of quiet assessment that made her straighten her shoulders. "That is resourceful of you," he said finally. "But it must be lonely work and cold with winter coming on. What do you do for food?" "I have a small garden behind the hotel, and I can usually trade salvage for supplies with the occasional traveler," Lucia said, not mentioning that such travelers were becoming increasingly rare, or that her garden had mostly failed this year due to the dry summer. "I do well enough." "Respectfully, Miss Vance, you do not look like you are doing well enough," Ethan said bluntly. "You look half-starved and this building is falling apart around you. What happens when the real cold comes? What happens when the roof finally gives way or the floor collapses?" Anger flared in Lucia's chest, hot and defensive. "What business is it of yours? You ride into town like some kind of savior, but you are just another person passing through, same as all the others. I have survived this long without help from strangers." "I am not passing through," Ethan said calmly. "I live 8 miles from here, and I am not trying to insult you. I am trying to offer help." "What kind of help?" Lucia demanded, descending the last few steps until they stood on level ground, separated by 10 feet of dusty floor. "You do not even know me." "I know you are alone in a dying town with winter coming," Ethan said. "I know you are too proud to admit you are in trouble. And I know my ranch house has more room than one man needs, with a kitchen that barely gets used and a stable boy who does all the cooking because I am terrible at it. I am offering you a place to stay, Miss Vance. A safe place, with regular meals and a roof that does not leak." Lucia stared at him, trying to process the unexpected offer. "You want me to come live at your ranch? I am a stranger to you. Why would you do such a thing?" "Because it is the right thing to do," Ethan said simply. "Because I know what it is like to be alone and I would not wish it on anyone. And because, if I am being honest, I could use the help. My housekeeper left last spring to care for her sick sister back east, and I have been managing on my own since then. The house is a disaster. Meals are haphazard at best, and I am fairly certain the upstairs is developing a serious dust problem. You clearly know how to keep house and organize things. It would be a fair trade, room and board in exchange for helping manage the household." It was a practical offer, Lucia realized, not charity. He was framing it as employment, which made it easier to swallow than simple pity. And God knew she needed employment, needed security, needed to get out of this crumbling hotel before winter truly set in, and she froze or starved or simply gave up. "I would need to bring my things," she said slowly, testing the idea. "Not much, but what I have is important to me." "Of course," Ethan agreed. "I have a wagon back at the ranch. I could come by tomorrow with it and help you move whatever you need." "Tomorrow?" Lucia's eyes widened. "You want me to decide right now? I know it is sudden," Ethan said, his expression patient. "But sometimes opportunities come when we least expect them. You can trust me, Miss Vance. I give you my word as a gentleman that you would be safe at my ranch. I have 3 ranch hands who live in the bunkhouse, and a stable boy named Tommy who is 16 and stays above the barn. You would have your own room in the main house, with a lock on the door if that makes you more comfortable. This is an offer of employment and shelter, nothing more." Lucia wanted to be suspicious, wanted to find the trap in his words, but there was something about Ethan Findley that seemed fundamentally honest. Maybe it was the directness of his gaze, or the way he stood with his hat in his hands like a supplicant rather than a threat. Maybe it was simply that she was tired of being alone, tired of being afraid, tired of pretending she was managing when she was barely surviving. "All right," she said, the word escaping before she could overthink it. "I will come to your ranch. But if I do not like it there, if anything seems wrong, I will leave immediately." "That is fair," Ethan said, and the smile that crossed his face transformed it entirely, making him suddenly, startlingly handsome. "I will be back tomorrow morning with the wagon. Pack what you need tonight, and we will get you settled properly." He put his hat back on and gave her a small nod of farewell before turning toward the door. Lucia watched him go, her mind spinning with the sudden change in her circumstances. At the threshold, Ethan paused and looked back at her. "Miss Vance, thank you for trusting me. I promise you will not regret it." Then he was gone, leaving Lucia standing alone in the lobby of the abandoned hotel, already second-guessing her decision and wondering what she had just agreed to. That night, as she sorted through her meager possessions by candlelight, Lucia tried to imagine what life at the Findley Ranch would be like. She had only a few dresses, all worn and mended multiple times, a small collection of books her mother had treasured, a quilt her grandmother had made, and various personal items that held more sentimental than monetary value. Everything fit into 2 worn carpetbags and a small trunk, a testament to how little she had accumulated in 22 years of life. Sleep came fitfully, her dreams a confused mixture of hope and anxiety. She woke before dawn, as was her habit, and spent the early morning cleaning the hotel room she had been using. An absurd gesture considering the state of the rest of the building, but one she could not help making. Her mother had always insisted on leaving places better than you found them, and old habits died hard. Ethan arrived promptly at 9 o'clock, driving a sturdy farm wagon pulled by 2 draft horses. With him was a boy who must be Tommy, all gangly limbs and bright curiosity, who bounded up the hotel steps with the energy of youth. "Good morning, Miss Vance," Ethan called, setting the brake and climbing down from the wagon seat. "This is Tommy Carson, my stable hand." He insisted on coming along to help with the heavy lifting. "There is not much that is heavy," Lucia said, gesturing to her bags and trunk lined up on the porch, "but I appreciate the help nonetheless." Tommy, who had sandy hair and freckles scattered across his sunburned nose, grinned at her. "Mr. Findley says you are going to be keeping house for us. That means real meals again instead of the slop we have been eating. I cannot wait." "Tommy," Ethan said warningly, but there was affection in his tone. "Mind your manners." "Sorry, boss," Tommy said, not sounding particularly sorry as he hefted Lucia's trunk with surprising ease. "But you know it is true. Your cooking could scare a vulture off a gut wagon." Despite her nervousness, Lucia found herself smiling. There was something disarming about Tommy's cheerful irreverence, and the easy relationship between him and Ethan. It spoke to a household that was informal but kind, which eased some of her concerns. The drive to the ranch took just over an hour, following a rough trail through open prairie that gradually gave way to more varied terrain, with rolling hills and scattered stands of cottonwood trees marking the path of a creek. Ethan drove with the easy competence of someone who had made this journey countless times, occasionally pointing out landmarks or explaining the boundaries of his property. "I have about 2,000 acres," he said as they crested a hill and the ranch came into view below. "It is not the biggest spread in Kansas, but it is productive. We run about 400 head of cattle, mostly for beef. I also have a small herd of horses that I breed and train." The ranch itself was more substantial than Lucia had expected. The main house was a two-story structure built from local stone and timber, with a wide front porch and multiple windows that suggested comfortable living space. Nearby stood a large barn, several outbuildings, and a bunkhouse for the ranch hands. A kitchen garden, now mostly harvested for winter, stretched behind the house, and several corrals held horses that lifted their heads to watch the wagon approach. It was, Lucia realized, a real home. Not the dying remnant of one like the hotel in Republic, but a living, working place where people built lives and futures. The realization made her chest tighten with an emotion she could not quite name. "What do you think?" Ethan asked, glancing at her as he brought the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "It is beautiful," Lucia said honestly. "You have built something remarkable here." "I had help," Ethan said, a shadow crossing his face. "My father started this ranch 30 years ago. I inherited it when he passed 5 years back." "I am sorry for your loss," Lucia said softly. "Thank you. He was a good man." Ethan set the brake and climbed down, then came around to help Lucia from the wagon seat. His hands were strong and steady at her waist, lifting her down as if she weighed nothing. "Come on, let me show you the house." The interior was indeed dusty but solidly built, with good furniture and comfortable spaces that had clearly been designed by someone who understood how a home should function. The main floor held a spacious kitchen with a modern cast iron stove, a dining room with a long wooden table, a sitting room with a stone fireplace, and a small office. Upstairs were 4 bedrooms, one clearly Ethan's, the others in various states of use and neglect. "This one would be yours," Ethan said, opening the door to a corner room with windows facing south and east. "It gets good light and there is a view of the creek. The furniture is a bit dusty, but it is sound." The room held an iron-framed bed with a bare mattress, a wardrobe, a dresser with a mirror, and a small writing desk beneath one window. It was easily twice the size of the hotel room Lucia had been living in, and infinitely more solid and warm. "It is perfect," she said, running her hand along the footboard of the bed. "Thank you, Mr. Findley." "Ethan," he corrected gently. "We are going to be living under the same roof. Formality seems excessive." "Ethan," Lucia repeated, the name feeling strange on her tongue. "Then you should call me Lucia." "Lucia," he said, and the way he spoke her name, carefully and with a slight smile, made something flutter in her stomach that she firmly ignored. Tommy and Ethan brought her belongings upstairs, and then Ethan left her to settle in while he returned to his work. Lucia spent the rest of the morning unpacking her few possessions and exploring the house more thoroughly, taking mental inventory of what needed cleaning, repairing, or organizing. The work ahead was substantial but not overwhelming, and for the first time in years, she felt a sense of purpose that went beyond mere survival. The ranch hands came in for the midday meal, introducing themselves with varying degrees of shyness. There was Walt Sawyer, the foreman, a grizzled man in his 50s with kind eyes and a quiet manner. Frank Moss was younger, maybe 30, with a quick smile and easy laugh. The third hand was Peter Webb, serious and hardworking, who barely said 2 words but nodded politely when introduced. They all looked at Lucia with obvious curiosity, but also with respect, following Ethan's lead in treating her as the lady of the house rather than a servant. The meal was simple, leftovers from whatever Tommy had attempted the night before, supplemented with bread and preserved vegetables from the root cellar. It was barely adequate, confirming Tommy's earlier comments about the quality of meals in Ethan's household. Lucia made mental notes about what supplies were available and what she would need to create proper meals. After lunch, while Ethan and the hands returned to work, Lucia began the process of reclaiming the kitchen. She scrubbed surfaces, organized supplies, inventoried the root cellar and smokehouse, and planned meals for the coming days. The work was familiar and soothing, giving her hands something to do while her mind processed the dramatic change in her circumstances. That evening, she prepared her first real meal for the household. Venison stew with vegetables, fresh biscuits, and dried apple pie using supplies she found in the well-stocked pantry. The men ate with the focused intensity of people who had been subsisting on inadequate food for too long, and the compliments were genuine and abundant. "This is the best meal I have had since my mother was still alive," Walt said, carefully wiping his mouth with his napkin. "You are a fine cook, Miss Lucia." "My mother taught me," Lucia said, feeling a warm flush of pride. She believed a good meal was one of life's greatest comforts. "She was right," Ethan said, meeting Lucia's eyes across the table with a look of such genuine gratitude that her breath caught. "Thank you for this. We have been living like bachelors for too long." As the days turned into weeks, Lucia settled into a rhythm at the ranch that felt almost unnaturally comfortable. She woke early to prepare breakfast for the men before they headed out to their various tasks. She spent her days cleaning and organizing the house, mending clothes, tending the kitchen garden's remaining cold-weather crops, and preparing the substantial meals that ranch work required. It was hard work, but it was purposeful work, and she found satisfaction in the transformation of the household. The house slowly revealed its potential under her care. She washed windows until they sparkled, beat rugs until no more dust emerged, scrubbed floors and polished furniture, and brought order to spaces that had been neglected for too long. She found curtains packed away in a trunk and hung them in the windows, aired out bedding, and even started making small improvements like arranging dried flowers in vases and setting the table with care. Ethan noticed the changes, often commenting on specific improvements with genuine appreciation. He was an easy person to work for, respectful of her space and time, never demanding but always appreciative. He had a quiet sense of humor that emerged in unexpected moments, and Lucia found herself looking forward to the evenings when they would sometimes sit in the parlor after dinner, she with her mending and he with his ranch accounts or a book. It was during one of these evenings that Lucia learned more about Ethan's history. They had been sitting in comfortable silence when he suddenly spoke, his gaze on the fire rather than on her. "I almost married once," he said abruptly. 3 years ago. Her name was Catherine Reed. She was the daughter of a banker in Abilene, beautiful and educated and everything a man was supposed to want. Lucia set down her mending, sensing this was a story he needed to tell. "What happened?" "She visited the ranch before the wedding," Ethan said, his voice flat. Took one look at the isolation, the hard work, the reality of ranch life, and decided she wanted no part of it. Called off the engagement and married a lawyer 6 months later. I cannot say I blame her. This life is not for everyone. It takes a certain kind of strength, Lucia said carefully. But that does not mean she was right and you were wrong. It means you were not right for each other. Maybe, Ethan said, finally looking at her, but it made me cautious about opening my life to someone again. Made me wonder if I was asking too much, expecting someone to choose this isolated existence. You are not asking, Lucia pointed out. You are offering. There is a difference. This ranch, this life, it has value and meaning. The right person would see that. Do you see it? Ethan asked, his blue-gray eyes intense in the firelight. Lucia's heart hammered, but she held his gaze. Yes, she said simply. I see it. Something shifted in that moment, a recognition passing between them that neither was quite ready to name. Ethan looked away first, clearing his throat and returning his attention to his account book. But the air between them had changed, charged with possibility. As November gave way to December, and the Kansas winter settled in earnest, Lucia found herself increasingly aware of Ethan's presence. The way he stamped snow from his boots before entering the house, mindful of her clean floors. The way he always thanked her for meals, never taking her work for granted. The way he smiled when he came in from the cold and found the house warm and welcoming, as if her efforts were a daily gift. She noticed other things too. The strength in his hands when he carried in firewood. The way his hair curled slightly when it got too long. The rare, full laugh that transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. The careful distance he maintained, never presuming on their proximity, always respectful of her independence and space. It was Tommy who first commented on what was becoming obvious to everyone but the two people involved. One afternoon in mid-December, while Lucia was preparing bread dough in the kitchen, the boy burst in from the cold, his cheeks red and his eyes sparkling with mischief. "Mr. Findley is in a rare good mood today," he announced, warming his hands at the stove. "Been whistling while he works. Walt says he has not seen the boss this content in all the years he has worked here. Perhaps he is simply pleased that the ranch is doing well," Lucia said, focusing very intently on kneading her dough. "Or perhaps he is pleased that you are here," Tommy said with the blunt honesty of youth. "Everyone can see how he looks at you, Miss Lucia, like you hung the moon and stars special just for him." "Tommy Carson, that is enough of that kind of talk," Lucia said, but her cheeks were burning. "Mr. Findley and I have a professional arrangement. I keep house and he provides room and board." "If you say so," Tommy said, clearly not believing a word of it. "But for what it is worth, I think you are good for him. He was turning into a hermit before you came, all work and no joy. Now he actually seems to remember there is more to life than cattle and horses." After Tommy left, Lucia stood at the kitchen window, watching Ethan work with one of the young horses in the corral. He moved with easy confidence, his voice low and soothing as he worked the animal on a long lead, patient and skilled. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up at the house, and even at this distance, she felt the connection between them like a physical thing. She was falling in love with him, Lucia realized with a mixture of terror and wonder. Falling in love with his steady kindness, his quiet strength, his dedication to the land and animals he cared for. Falling in love with the life he had built, the home he had offered her, the future that seemed to shimmer just out of reach, waiting for her to be brave enough to claim it. The question was whether he felt the same way, or if she was simply the latest in a series of practical solutions to the problems of running a household alone. Christmas approached, and Lucia threw herself into preparations with perhaps more enthusiasm than was strictly warranted. She baked cookies and pies, decorated the house with evergreen branches and ribbons, and even fashioned a wreath for the front door from materials she gathered along the creek. The men watched her efforts with bemused appreciation. and Ethan's eyes seemed to follow her constantly, though he said little about the transformation of his home into something festive and welcoming. On Christmas Eve after dinner, Ethan asked Lucia to join him in the parlor while the ranch hands retired to the bunkhouse and Tommy to his room above the barn. She sat in her usual chair by the fire, puzzled when Ethan remained standing, clearly nervous about something. "I have something for you," he said finally, producing a wrapped package from behind his back. "It is not much, but I wanted you to have it." Lucia took the package with trembling fingers, carefully unwrapping the brown paper to reveal a beautiful shawl in deep blue wool, soft and warm and clearly expensive. "Ethan, this is too much. I cannot accept something so fine." "You can and you will," Ethan said firmly. "You have transformed this house, Lucia. You have brought life and warmth back to a place that was becoming cold and empty. You work harder than anyone I know, and you never complain, never ask for anything. Please, let me give you this small thing." "It is not a small thing," Lucia said, running her fingers over the soft wool. "It is beautiful, thank you." "There is something else," Ethan said, and now he did sit down, perching on the edge of the chair across from her. "Something I need to say, and I am probably going to make a mess of it, but I have to try." Lucia's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. "What is it?" "When I brought you here, I told myself it was a practical arrangement," Ethan said, his words coming faster now, as if he needed to get them all out before he lost his nerve. "I told myself I needed a housekeeper and you needed a home, and it was a fair trade that benefited us both." And that was true as far as it went. But it stopped being the whole truth somewhere along the way, and now I find myself in a position I swore I would never be in again. "What position is that?" Lucia whispered. "In love," Ethan said simply, meeting her eyes. "I am in love with you, Lucia Vance. I love the way you sing while you work. I love how you have made this house into a home. I love your strength and your kindness, and the way you look at the world like it is full of possibilities instead of disappointments. I love that you give everyone around you your best, even when you have no reason to. I love you, and I know I said this was just a professional arrangement, and if that is all you want it to be, I will respect that. But I had to tell you the truth. I had to let you know that you have become everything to me." Tears were streaming down Lucia's face now, but she was smiling through them, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. "You foolish, wonderful man," she said, her voice breaking. "Do you think I could spend every day caring for your home, cooking your meals, watching you work, and not fall completely in love with you? I have been terrified that you only saw me as an employee, someone useful but not precious. I was afraid to hope for more." Ethan was out of his chair in an instant, kneeling beside her, taking her hands in his. "You are precious to me," he said fiercely. "You are everything. Lucia, I know we have only known each other a few months, and if you need more time, I understand. But I already know what I want. I want you here always, not as my housekeeper, but as my wife. I want to build a life with you, a real partnership. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep next to you every night. I want to face whatever the future brings together. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Lucia said, the word coming out half laugh, half sob. "Yes, of course yes. I love you, Ethan. I want all of that too." He pulled her into his arms then, and she went willingly, burying her face against his shoulder as he held her like she was something infinitely valuable and fragile. When he finally pulled back to look at her, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "I do not have a ring yet," he admitted. "I wanted to ask you first, make sure you would say yes before I went to the trouble." "I do not need a ring right now," Lucia said, cupping his face with her hands. "I need this. I need you." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and Lucia felt like she was finally, truly home. They were married in late January in a simple ceremony at the small church in the nearest town, Scandia, about 15 miles northwest of the ranch. The weather was cold but clear, and the small gathering of ranch hands, neighbors, and a few townspeople felt exactly right for the life they were building together. Lucia wore a new dress Ethan had ordered from a catalog, simple but beautiful in cream-colored wool, and carried a small bouquet of dried flowers since nothing bloomed in Kansas in January. When Ethan slipped the gold band onto her finger and said his vows, his voice was steady and sure, and Lucia knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. This was the future she was meant to have, this man and this place and this life they would build together. The ranch became truly theirs in the months that followed, not just Ethan's property that Lucia helped maintain, but a shared enterprise they built together. Lucia proved to have a head for accounts and organization, taking over the ranch's financial records and bringing order to what had been Ethan's haphazard system. She also had ideas about diversifying the ranch's income, suggesting they increase the kitchen garden to sell vegetables in town, expand the chicken flock to sell eggs, and even start making and selling preserves and baked goods. Ethan listened to her suggestions with respect and implemented most of them, recognizing that her instincts were sound. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts, becoming not just a cattle operation but a more diverse and stable enterprise. They worked as true partners, making decisions together, supporting each other through challenges, celebrating successes. The physical intimacy of marriage came naturally to them both, building on the emotional connection they had already established. Ethan was a gentle and considerate lover, attentive to Lucia's needs and responses, and she found joy in learning how to please him as well. Their bedroom became a sanctuary where the day's stresses fell away and only their love for each other mattered. As spring arrived and the prairie turned green again, Lucia discovered she was pregnant. She told Ethan one evening after dinner, unable to contain the news any longer, and watched as understanding, and then pure joy transformed his face. "A baby," he said wonderingly, pulling her into his arms. "We are going to have a baby. Lucia, you have made me the happiest man alive." "Are you hoping for a boy or a girl?" Lucia asked, leaning back to see his face. "I am hoping for a healthy child and a safe delivery for you," Ethan said seriously. "Everything else is just details. Though I confess, I would not mind a boy to eventually teach the ranching business. Or a girl who is as strong and capable as her mother. Really, I will be grateful for whatever we are given." The pregnancy progressed well, though Lucia experienced the normal discomforts, and Ethan became increasingly protective as her belly swelled with their child. He insisted she rest more, do less heavy work, take care of herself. It was both endearing and occasionally frustrating, but Lucia understood it came from love and worry rather than any desire to control her. In early November, almost exactly 1 year after Ethan had found Lucia in the abandoned hotel in Republic, their son was born after a long but ultimately uncomplicated labor. They named him Samuel Ethan Findley, and he was perfect in every way that mattered, with his father's blue-gray eyes and a shock of dark hair. Ethan held his son with the careful reverence of a man who understood the preciousness of what he had been given. "Thank you," he said to Lucia, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you for him, for us, for everything you have brought to my life." "Thank you for giving me a home when I needed one most," Lucia said, exhausted but happier than she had ever been. "For seeing me when I was invisible to everyone else." Life with a newborn was chaotic and exhausting and wonderful. Samuel was a good baby, generally content and healthy, and Lucia found motherhood came to her naturally. Ethan was a devoted father, taking over whatever household tasks he could manage to give Lucia time to rest and care for their son. Tommy, now 17 and increasingly responsible, proved surprisingly good with the baby, often entertaining him while Lucia prepared meals or caught up on other work. The ranch continued to prosper, and as Samuel grew from infant to toddler, Lucia felt her roots sinking deeper into this place and this life. She had friends now among the neighboring ranch wives, women who gathered monthly for quilting circles and conversation. She had purpose beyond mere survival, had a partner who valued her contributions, had a child to raise and a home to nurture. When Samuel was 2 years old, Lucia became pregnant again, and this time their daughter was born in early summer, a tiny thing they named Margaret Ann, who had her mother's dark hair and her father's serious expression. Samuel was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything and occasionally needing to be reminded to be gentle. Ethan, watching Lucia nurse their daughter while their son played nearby with his wooden horses, felt his heart might burst from the fullness of it all. "Do you ever think about how close we came to never having this?" he asked. "If I had ridden through Republic a day earlier or later, if you had been somewhere else in that hotel when I arrived, if you had said no to my offer." "I try not to think about it," Lucia admitted. "It is too frightening to consider. But I believe some things are meant to be, Ethan. We were meant to find each other. Everything before that was just the journey to where we were supposed to end up." "I am glad the journey led me to you," Ethan said, kissing her forehead. "Every single day, I am grateful for you." The years passed with the steady rhythm of ranch life, marked by seasons and harvests, by cattle drives and horse training, by children growing and the daily work of maintaining a household and enterprise. Samuel grew into a serious, responsible boy who followed his father everywhere, learning the business of ranching from the time he could walk. Margaret was more spirited, more likely to be found helping her mother in the garden or racing across the prairie on her pony than sitting quietly with needlework. When Samuel was 7 and Margaret was 5, Lucia gave birth to twins, a boy and girl they named William and Rose. Ethan joked that their family was complete now that they had an even 4 children, but Lucia suspected they might not be quite finished yet. She loved motherhood, loved the chaos and joy of their growing family, and Ethan was such a natural father that every child thrived under his attention and care. The ranch grew along with their family. They added more land, increased the herds, built a new barn, and expanded the house to accommodate their growing children. Ethan trained horses that became famous throughout the region for their quality and temperament. Lucia's preserves and baked goods were sought after in 3 counties. The ranch hands who had been there when Lucia arrived stayed on, becoming like family themselves, and new hands were hired as the enterprise expanded. Tommy married at 19, bringing his bride Maria to live at the ranch, and eventually they built their own small house on the property, raising their own children alongside the Findley brood. Walt retired eventually, though he stayed on the ranch in a small cottage Ethan built for him, too much a part of the place to ever truly leave. Frank and Peter moved on to other opportunities, replaced by younger men who learned the Findley way of ranching, which emphasized treating animals with respect and workers with fairness. Through it all, Lucia and Ethan's love deepened and matured, becoming something richer and more complex than the initial passionate connection. They learned each other's patterns and moods, developed their own private languages and jokes, weathered disagreements and challenges with the understanding that their partnership was strong enough to withstand stress. They made love less frequently than in their early years together, but with no less passion. their physical intimacy evolving to match the changes in their lives and bodies. When Lucia turned 40, she found herself pregnant one final time, a surprise but not an unwelcome one. Their youngest son, Thomas, named for Tommy who had become like a brother to Ethan over the years, was born healthy and arrived into a household that was organized chaos. His older siblings doted on him, and he grew up surrounded by love and activity. As their children grew into adults, Lucia and Ethan transitioned into the next phase of life. Samuel took over more of the daily ranching operations, proving to have his father's instincts and his mother's organizational skills. Margaret married a neighboring rancher's son and moved just 5 miles away, close enough to visit regularly. The twins headed east for college, William to study veterinary medicine, and Rose to study teaching, both planning to return to Kansas eventually. Thomas was still young, just learning to ride and help with small tasks around the ranch. On a cool evening in late October, nearly 30 years after Ethan had found Lucia folding linens in that abandoned hotel, they sat together on their porch watching the sun set over the prairie. Lucia was gray now, as was Ethan, their faces lined with years of hard work and laughter. But when he took her hand, the gesture was as full of love as it had been when they were young. "Do you have any regrets?" Ethan asked, a question he had never posed before. "Not a single one," Lucia said honestly. "Sometimes I try to imagine what would have happened if I had stayed in Republic, if I had said no to your offer. I would have frozen or starved that first winter, I think. I certainly would not have had this life, this family, this love. You saved me, Ethan." "We saved each other," Ethan corrected gently. "I was turning into a bitter hermit before you came along. You reminded me what it meant to have a home instead of just a house, a partner instead of just employees, a purpose beyond work. You gave me everything that matters." "We gave it to each other," Lucia agreed, leaning her head on his shoulder. "That is what makes it so precious." Samuel came out of the house then, his own wife following with their first child, Ethan and Lucia's first grandchild, a baby girl named Caroline. "We are heading home before it gets too dark," Samuel said. "Do you need anything before we go?" "We have everything we need," Lucia said, smiling at her son and his family. "Be safe going home. We will see you on Sunday for dinner." After they left, taking the noise and energy of young parenthood with them, the evening settled into peaceful quiet. Ethan and Lucia remained on the porch as stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, neither feeling the need to fill the silence with words. "I love you," Ethan said finally, the simple words carrying the weight of 3 decades of shared life. "I love you too," Lucia replied. "Always have, always will." They sat together until the air grew too cold to remain outside, then went into the house they had built together, the home that had started with an impulsive offer from a lonely rancher to a desperate woman, and had become the foundation of a life neither could have imagined that day in the abandoned hotel. As Lucia banked the fire for the night and Ethan checked the locks on the doors, she reflected on the journey that had brought them here. She had been folding linens in an abandoned hotel, alone and afraid, her future uncertain and bleak. Ethan had given her a home, yes, but more than that. He had given her the space to discover who she really was, what she was capable of, what she could build when given the opportunity and support. In turn, she had given him a family, a true partnership, and the realization that vulnerability was not weakness but the only path to real connection. They had built something remarkable together, not just the successful ranch but the life that filled it, the love that sustained it, the legacy that would outlive them both. Years continued to pass, each bringing its own joys and sorrows. They buried Walt when he died peacefully in his sleep at 83, standing together at his grave with all their children and grandchildren around them, honoring a man who had been family in all but blood. They celebrated marriages and births, welcoming new members into their growing family. They weathered droughts and hard winters, market crashes and cattle diseases, all the challenges that came with ranching life. Through it all, Ethan and Lucia remained each other's constant, the center around which everything else revolved. They grew old together, their bodies wearing down even as their love remained strong. Ethan's hands became gnarled with arthritis, but they still reached for Lucia every morning. Lucia's hair turned white, but Ethan still looked at her like she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. When Ethan's health began to fail in his early 70s, Lucia cared for him with the same devotion she had brought to every aspect of their life together. Samuel and the others wanted to hire nurses, to move him to a hospital, but Ethan refused, wanting to remain in the home he had built, surrounded by the land he loved and the family they had created. "I am not afraid," he told Lucia one night, his breathing labored but his eyes still clear. "How can I be afraid when I have lived such a full, blessed life? You gave me that, Lucia. You gave me everything." "You gave it to me first," Lucia said, tears streaming down her weathered face. "You saw me when I was invisible. You offered me a home when I had nothing. You loved me when I had forgotten how to hope." "Best decision I ever made," Ethan said, his voice weak but sure. "Riding through that dying town, walking into that abandoned hotel, offering you a place at my ranch. Best decision of my entire life." He died 3 days later, peacefully in his sleep with Lucia beside him, his children and grandchildren filling the house with their presence and love. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, where he could keep watch over the land he had tended for so many years. Lucia grieved deeply, but not without hope. She had loved and been loved, had lived a life rich with meaning and connection, had raised children who would carry forward the values she and Ethan had instilled. She remained at the ranch, refusing to move into town or live with one of her children, insisting she was perfectly capable of managing on her own. Samuel and his family visited daily, and her other children came as often as they could. The grandchildren, now numbering 12, ensured the house was never quiet for long. Lucia spent her days tending her garden, visiting with neighbors, watching the ranch continue under Samuel's capable management, and feeling grateful for every moment she had been given. On a cool November evening, 5 years after Ethan's passing, Lucia found herself thinking about that day so long ago when everything had changed. She had been 22 years old, alone in an abandoned hotel, folding linens as if order and cleanliness could somehow fill the void of loneliness and fear. Then a lonely rancher had walked through the door and offered her a home, and everything that followed had stemmed from that single moment of unexpected grace. She had lived a good life, Lucia reflected. Not a perfect life, not without pain or loss or difficulty, but a good life. She had been loved deeply and loved in return. She had raised children and built a home and contributed something meaningful to the world. She had known partnership and purpose, and the kind of joy that comes from shared struggle and triumph. As she sat on the porch watching the sun set over the prairie one last time, surrounded by the land she and Ethan had tended together for so many years, Lucia felt a profound sense of peace. She had been given something precious, something that had started with a desperate woman and a kind man, and had grown into a legacy that would last long after she was gone. The following spring, Lucia passed away quietly in her sleep at the age of 79, content and ready. They buried her beside Ethan on the hill, and their children and grandchildren stood together, grieving but also celebrating the remarkable love story that had been their parents' lives. The ranch continued, passed down through the generations, each one adding to the foundation Ethan and Lucia had laid. The old house still stood on the property 100 years later, carefully preserved by descendants who understood they were the inheritors of something special. Inside, in a place of honor, hung a framed piece of linen, yellowed with age, with a small brass plaque beneath it that read, "From the abandoned hotel where it all began. Ethan and Lucia Findley, 1878–1959. It was a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin in the most unlikely places, that kindness offered to a stranger can transform two lives, and that a home is not just a place, but what two people build together when they commit to sharing their journey, their struggles, and their love. The prairie wind still blew across the land as it had for countless generations, carrying with it the echo of a question asked long ago in an abandoned hotel and the answer that had changed everything. What kind of help? A place to stay, a safe place. All right, I will come to your ranch. And from that simple exchange, a life had been built, a family had been created, a love had flourished that would never be forgotten. The lonely rancher had given her a home to keep, and she had filled it with love that lasted beyond their lifetimes, proving that the greatest gift we can offer another person is the chance to begin again, to hope again, to love again. Their story lived on in the memories of those who knew them, in the legacy of the ranch they built together, and in the enduring truth that sometimes salvation comes not in grand gestures but in simple offers of kindness, in doors open to strangers, in homes shared freely, and in love given without reservation or fear. Ethan and Lucia had found each other when both were lost, and together they had created something that would never be lost as long as there were people to remember their story and understand the power of two lonely souls who chose to face the future together. One day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of love at a time.